All right, now we'll begin. Again, I'm Cindy Cornell. I'm the career coach for working professionals here at the Yale School of Management. And today we're talking about closing gaps in your resume to get the role. Just because you have a break in your career employment, your formal career employment, or you might be missing an element or two that's in a job description, does not mean that you're not going to be successful in that role. So in our conversation today, hopefully you'll see how you can describe your prior experience and your skills in ways that employers are as excited about you as you are as excited about that job. Your untraditional or non-traditional background may even be seen to be an asset. While we're here today, please focus on our time together, and you're welcome to reach out and ask questions in the Q&A. I also would encourage you, if you'd like to have a more formal conversation about your own situation, to reach out and make an appointment through the alumni portal to into our CMS system, career management system, to make a coaching appointment with me to talk about yourself specifically. And then finally, let me give you an advertisement that there will be a survey in the chat close to the end of the session. We would absolutely appreciate your feedback there as well about the session and what we can do to make it better in the future and what you might be looking for in the future as well. So thank you again for being here. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about gaps, different types of gaps. We're going to talk about your story about those gaps. And then we're going to move into a discussion about how you deliver the story about your gaps. And really, you'll see through the course of our time together, I'm going to speak less about the gaps and more about the fact that you are really qualified for the role that you're applying to. The session will be recorded, and you will be able to go back over any of the parts of it that you might want to look at again. And you will also, for those of you who are here live and registered, you will receive a copy of the recording emailed to you following the session. So I've mentioned this before, where we're going. I am hopeful that you have some new ideas. You're already smart about searches. I'm hopeful that by the end of the session, you can identify a couple blind spots you might have in your strategy, such that you are able to articulate your competence and capability in ways that you maybe haven't in the past, really forward thinking. Not everybody follows a traditional career path. With focus and practice, I'm hopeful that you can talk about your career and how you've acquired the skills across your career as confidently as you're able to share your own name. One of the things recruiters are really adamant about in the search process is that you're really clear about what you're looking for, and that's really important. So I also want you to be understanding before you apply what they're looking for, and you can articulate clearly the alignment between what that role requires and how you can fulfill it, so that you're able to capture their attention and hold it. That's the only way you're going to get invited for the interview. So again, having that answer about why you're great for the role up front is super important. That comes from research. We've talked about that in lots of other webinars. I'm just putting that out up front because that's foundational to your success here. We do want to put forward language that's going to capture people's attention in a positive way that gets you the interview and ultimately gets you the role if you want it. So first, talking about your gap. Gaps look different for different people. It could be a break from formal employment. It could be a criteria in a job description that says you need 7 years of this or you need this title. It could be a lot of different things. I want to point out that people transcend gaps all the time. Anytime you move into a new role, you're promoted within the same company, you've typically not done everything in that role before because you haven't had it. So there's always this element of learning and growing, and people move people into new roles because they see that competency and that capability, and also the interest. So again, people transcend gaps all the time. You can transcend yours also. Sometimes you might need to actually do a little bit of work to achieve some level of competence or new information that you haven't been previously exposed to, or some new perspective that may be appropriate for a new industry that you've not previously been involved with. And it's possible. People do it all the time. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. For any resume to get traction, I said this a few moments ago and it bears repeating. it needs to catch and capture the attention of your intended audience. How do you do that? Again, you do that through your own research and knowing what they're looking for, understanding their culture. When you add in the complexity of closing a gap, you also have to evaluate that through the lens of their perspective. From a recruitment perspective, a gap is about risk management. A recruiter is looking to figure out not if you can do the job, but is there anything in your resume or anything in your application materials that would indicate that you can't? And if you haven't actually shown them very clearly that you can, that's where you're actually going to get tossed from the process if you're strictly going through an ATS system. Recruiters are often controlling for not getting it wrong versus getting it right. The idea of the work that they need to go through to take a chance on you, to see if you could be a non-traditional person successful in this new role, they don't actually know necessarily enough about the business, the work itself, to put themselves at that risk of upsetting the person they're trying to hire for. So again, if you make it too much work for them, if you haven't done it for them up front, you're not doing yourself a favor. So that slowing down, tailoring your documents, identifying those gaps, and working to close them is the work, and that's why we're here today. Moving ahead, I want you to own your gaps, and what that means first is to identify them. A lot of people will walk into a coaching appointment with me and say, I have a great resume. I'm really excited about what it looks like. It's exactly where I want it. I'm just not getting a call. Well, there's a disconnect there because you actually haven't answered what they are looking for. If you had, they would be calling you. So we need to really think about that employer perspective and identify the gaps from their point of view. I talk about unpacking job descriptions in a prior webinar. That could be a good one for you to go back and look at, and really understanding what would I be doing on a Thursday afternoon in this role, or in 3 or 6 months, what would success metrics be, and which skills will I have leveraged to achieve those success metrics. So really thinking about what they think that you need to be successful from a skill and outcome standpoint, and also comparing that to what you currently have. So you're identifying the gap. You're also identifying the stories that you have that show that you have that relevant transferable skills and experience. And then we would get into the space of updating the resume to showcase stories. Bullet points are really previews to stories that you'd like to tell in the interview. So we're going to set up those stories that show you can do it. And then we're going to practice those stories conversationally. This is also really important. Closing the gap isn't really about focusing on what's missing. Closing the gap is about sharing why and how you can do the things that they want, and sharing that in a way that they are excited about you. And for you to do that, you actually have to share it in a believable way. So other questions that I might ask in this space to kind of really figure out if you've answered the questions. What experience would I have if there was no gap? And then figure out if there's different ways to fill that in. What is it that they want me to do that they're concerned I wouldn't be able to do today, specifically in their terms? How will you do it? On what strengths will you draw? So that's really owning the gap. I also want to talk about 2020. There's lots of people that have a gap in 2020. People took breaks because they chose to leave work and spend more time with their families. And some people took breaks because there was an economic crisis resulting from a pandemic that many, many people participated in and can understand. So you don't need to really kind of focus on that too much, except where you're talking about how you've actually stayed relevant, what you'd been doing in that time, because you weren't just sitting on your computer and kind of playing games or watching movies. That was a piece of it maybe, but there were other things that you were doing to keep yourself professionally relevant. And I also have encouraged some folks to even talk about the fact that they were able to observe the pandemic and the economic influences and impacts from a perspective where they were not biased by the issues of a specific company. So you might have a broader point of view that is expansive of more than just one company or an industry, more about the interplay of those. Showing people that you know how to do that is actually is important too. It shows that you are going to be able to help them architect ideas into the future for our evolving future of work. So a resume gap, as I mentioned a minute ago, is a real or perceived disconnect. Maybe you have the experience and maybe you don't. So it could be real. It could be just something where they think you don't have it or they think you couldn't do it. A gap viewed from the other side is a risk that you wouldn't be able to meet criteria that is required by the role. Again, if they believe you can't, can be overcome if you're referred in by people who believe you can. So I talked to somebody earlier today who said, I need to beat the ATS system. And my answer to that often is, we need to be aware of how the ATS system works, the automated tracking systems and some of the AI that's screening resumes. We don't want to beat it, we want to work with it. And where we can, we want to go around it. So if you're able to leverage a network where people like you and they are more willing to put their professional capital out there to say, you know what, Cindy doesn't have a traditional background in the way that we have hired in the past, and here's why she'd be an amazing candidate for this role, that's kind of where you want to play. When you can use your network to overcome that gap proactively, that's pretty powerful. And it also, in leveraging your network, helps you to understand the language of the company that you're talking to, which brings me to my next point, is one size does not fit all. You don't have one gap perceived by one person in one company. Even in the same company, many people in different departments may perceive your gap differently from their own personal experience or from the perspective of what they want you to do as you would be involved with their particular function. So it is always by the perspective of the reader. So as much as you can learn about divisions, departments, companies, industries, individuals, the more the better, because then you can actually address values in terms that they would appreciate and they would find resonant. This is again why when people ask me, who do you recommend for resume writing? I don't. I want you to tailor it. I want you to be able to think about the role and to show how good you are in achieving these outcomes in this role. And if you have a resume writer, you're going to have them do that for every single job description. And if you're not, again, we're back to the one size does not fit all. So lots of things you can do to prepare yourself to be successful in a new role or a new career. If we are talking about a gap in that type of an industry, I spoke about a lot of sources and ideas in a recent webinar, Game-Changing Job Search Resources. So you might want to check that out. Sometimes it is as simple as translating what you did into the terms of the new company. Again, an earlier coaching conversation I had just today, somebody had shown me a job description and they showed me their resume. And before I even looked at the resume, I took a quick glance at it, so I kind of knew what I was working with. But I looked over to the job description and I read just the verbs, just the active verbs at the beginning of the sentences, and I listed them off. And I said, "Are any of these words in your resume?" And the short answer was no. And the ideas or the topics were in the resume. The stories just hadn't been translated into language that the applicant tracking system or the company would find resonant. So where you've been collaborative, where you've been innovative, if the company is using those words in the application, you're probably going to want to use that there. Otherwise, you're creating a gap that doesn't exist. That's one of those perceived gaps because you haven't taken the time to make the translation. In an interview, this is another tactic you can use. You might want to test your hypothesis. You've done your preparation. You think you know what's going to fit for these people. You could say something like, it seems that the person who would be successful in this role would have these skills with an ability to deliver these types of results. Do I have that correct? Job descriptions, usually aren't so clear in that respect. So to even get to that summary statement, you'd need to do a little bit of work. Listen to what they have to say. It's going to be a lot easier for you to give them what they're asking for if you've heard it in their own words in an interview, than it will be for you simply to be guessing the whole time through. So hopefully you see now that one size does not fit all, and we want to kind of really leverage that earlier work we've done in really researching the role and the company. Something that people do all the time, if they have a gap, they want to hide behind a functional resume that takes away those years and makes the gap disappear. It doesn't, people will figure it out. They use old labels to attract new roles. People often in their LinkedIn will have a title, their current title from their current company, and they want to move to something else. So we're advertising ourselves in social media as the thing that we don't want, not the thing we do want. So really kind of think about, how do we actually present ourselves in ways that helps people to know who we are, what we can do for them, and that we're showing up in a way that really is compelling and exciting, where they're believing that we'd be a great fit for their team and their culture. Your unique experience is going to be golden to the right person. They're going to be as excited about you, about joining the role. Please be careful to spend time on employers and opportunities where there's evidence that success is possible. There are some employers that are dogmatic about what you need to do to get to certain roles. Even though you might want that, it isn't necessarily going to be the best focus if you spend 100% of your time on a company that's already said no. So this is, again, why we want to understand hiring practices, culture, and what they value. Lots of recruiters as well want non-complicated people. So you want to actually have a peek at your qualifications and see how you can share them as simply as you can in their terms. Again, I don't want you to waste a lot of time or spend a lot of time on already closed doors. It takes a lot of energy to job search well, and I want you to have that positive energy and reinforcement by having fun conversations that are moving forward, future focused, and where people are challenging and building your thinking such that you're presenting yourself even better for the next one, even if they say no to you on this one. Just one more point on this. In Game Changing Job Search Resources, I shared several sources for kind of research. And some people say it takes too much time to tailor all these resumes. I think that's a much better use of time than sending out 100 resumes and not getting a response. I'd rather you send out 3 and get 1 or 2 positive responses than 100 with none. So that's the value that you need to assess. So hopefully we've talked about gaps a little bit. It could be a gap in experience, time. It could be a specific requirement in terms of years or age. It could be a specific requirement in terms of, you must be a CPA. We're going to understand what those things are and why they think those are important. And we're going to then talk about your story and how we actually answer that. Before we commit anything to paper, it starts up here. So your mindset, how you speak to yourself through the job search process, and I alluded to this already, is really important. It influences as well how you show up. So I want you to embrace your experiences and share them in a way that makes it easy for others to be excited about learning more about you. You are competent, you are fit for work, you are stable, you are employable. You know this. We want it to make it easy for them to know this too. If you're on the fence or you're not quite there yet, brainstorm a dozen reasons for each of those about why you really are. And then we can think about, how do we share that in ways that's going to capture their attention? What is it that they're going to actually ask more about and say yes to? This kind of learning and generative learning reflects a growth mindset. If you need a refresher about growth mindset, I'd encourage you to watch Carol Dweck's TED Talk, The Power of Believing That You Can Improve. Managing what can be perceived as a significant gap is going to take some effort. And it's likely going to take a little bit of trial and error. Again, remembering that different people are going to respond to things in different ways. Keep an open mind and be curious, asking questions that help you refine both your thinking and your storytelling. There's a great job out there for you. You just haven't connected with it yet. Let's keep believing that that's possible, and some cool things will evolve, I promise. Minding the gap. Right? So I want you to kind of just picture this. You've seen the signs, mind the gap. I'm pretty sure you've not seen anyone not either enter or exit a train because of the gap. Right? We have to watch the gap. If we don't watch the gap, you could slip. But it doesn't mean that we can't cross the gap. So again, it's a gap. How do we leap over it for you in this situation? Job search can be challenging, and I want you to beware the spiral thinking where we're focused again on that gap. If you're looking at the gap, it's going to make it seem bigger, and you're going to use less of your reflexes around how to overcome it. Again, I really love contemporary neuroscience, and when you're focusing on problem or you feel threatened, we tend to put all of our thinking back into our base brain, the amygdala, where we can talk about an amygdala hijack, or potentially even moving into the emotive brain, the base brain, and it's all limbic and emotive. That's not where the higher level thinking is going to come. That's all up here in the prefrontal cortex. That's where we're going to figure out how to get over that gap, how to overcome, over, under, or through. And again, just notice the negative thinking when it pops in, work through it, don't stuff it. And recognize often that if you're contemplating an ending and something that you've left behind, there's a grief process that goes along with that. And there's also one of my favorite quotes. T.S. Eliot says, the end is where we start from, which is indeed true. Beginnings are endings from another day. So let's talk about first explaining a break. I mentioned before, you're not the only one. Recruiters understand that people might have breaks in their resumes for different reasons. Some people have stepped out to care for family. Some people have stepped out for medical reasons. Some people have stepped out because they decided that they were going to, hike a mountain and train for that. This is they're taking their own, kind of personal sabbatical. You don't need to overthink that. Where there's a large break or a recent break, you want to have a confident way to speak about it. And you do this by anticipating questions and preparing responses that you can answer thoughtfully and confidently. As soon as you start to feel anxious about it, or you're showing that you're upset about it, or you're not confident about it, they're going to push a little bit more because they want to make sure that you in fact aren't a risk and that you are well qualified. Less is more, right? Say your thing and let it be done. If you say, I in fact did step out to care for children, and I am fortunate to have been able to do that. And in the midst of, kind of the laundry and the carpooling that I was, managing on a regular basis, I also did these couple of things to keep myself, up to speed professionally, and then be done. And don't fill the gap. Let them process that. People might simply say, wow, I appreciate your candor. And we're, again, flipping it back to, I'm available for work today. When I think about resume, it occurs to me that resume and resume are the same word, just said differently. So again, I want you to think about your resume as being an advertisement that you're ready to resume work, and that you're available and ready. You can also share, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, what you observed in the markets that might have led to a downsizing, and how you might be preparing to upgrade your skills. I talked about the future of work a couple of months ago with SOM alum Jeff Schwartz, who wrote a book called Work Disrupted. I also talked about reimagining your career in 2021 back in January. We talked a lot about future skills, and you might actually identify that there's some things that you might like to know about technology that you don't know, or learning, or could be any number of things in an industry that is evolving as a result of certain of the changes that are happening sociologically, or just simply because we're moving into an automated evolution of business that's following in the information age of business. So share those ideas, and you don't need to share a lot of details about why or how you were laid off or let go unless they ask. And in that case as well, simple, succinct, honest, always honest. Again, people can understand if you're not being honest, and that's going to create some anxiety and discord between you and in the interview. Last quick thing is never, ever, ever, please never badmouth your former employers. That says more about you than it does about them. If things are commonly known in your industry or whatnot, you can simply acknowledge that you learned a lot about management while there, some of those about things that you'd like to do differently. and focus again on the future and the skills that you're bringing forward. In any break, I want you to think about, how did you grow? And I want you to also think about how you're going to claim value for that, again, in language that they're going to find resonant and helpful from their point of view. It doesn't matter if it was your choice or if it wasn't your choice. If you took time off, what did you do with it? What new perspectives and interests did you develop? What attitudes and behaviors did you grow? How have those experiences made you even a more powerful and stronger professional? Some of the things that many people look at in terms of volunteering are in fact incredibly complicated. It could be even coaching a child's little league team. If you think about that, it's a place to show growth and management. You're dealing with a larger league, not just your team. There's likely some safe sport trainings that went in there around regulation and rules that you needed to learn and enforce. You had to work on your own time management. You had to communicate time management skills to the parents and the children, and even other coaches as you were delegating work as appropriate to different people. You were ensuring that children that were on the team maybe got the skills that they needed, and that they also were or conducting themselves in good sportsmanlike ways, following those rules so that they could succeed both on the field and off in life. And there may have also been some logistical issues around equipment or a budget to manage, those types of things as well. So how did that help you as a leader? Those are things you can draw from as well. Unpack experiences like those and see how they showcase your leadership, your organizational, your problem solving, and your communication skills. They do. You just maybe haven't articulated it in a way that people could say, I can see how that would be a big deal. So we're owning a gap. Let's talk about closing a gap. There may be a skill gap. There may be, as we were talking about, that formal gap in employment. What did you do during that time? So it's not just this, break. It could be a piece of that break was I traveled internationally for 6 months. And here's what I learned about these different cultures. So there's not just this big, vast amount of time where you did nothing. You can share a couple of those stories. And oftentimes recruiters might look at you and say, wow, that's amazing. I wish I could do that. So again, claim value in a way that people see the value that you see in it. You visited family, whatever it might have been. You worked on a farm, you did something. If you're in a gap right now and you haven't been doing much other than maybe looking at jobs on your computer, this is your invitation to please go do something, learn something new. Again, focusing on problems, focusing on the gap, focusing on the fact that you don't have a job isn't the mindset that's going to help you to think creatively, using your prefrontal cortex to innovate into new spaces. And put together a new combination of skills in a way and language that's going to attract other people. So again, we want to, if you're in a gap, think about how would I like to speak about this time enthusiastically on the other side, and then take steps to fill it that way. Not all work is paid. So there may be, even early in your career, or when you were at SOM or in other places, or maybe volunteer or other unpaid places where you've shown leadership and experience there. I spoke to somebody recently who said, this is the first time I've ever managed people. They'd worked in public policy. They managed people and processes all the time in that capacity. It just wasn't as formal. And informal leadership and management and influence is an incredibly important skill. And I would say is sometimes even more challenging to find than those people that can actually only manage when they have that direct reporting responsibility. So you have a lot of skills, you just may not yet have identified them as being part of your own set of superpowers that people might be excited by. If you are working on a gap currently and it's not quite filled yet, share what you're working on. this is a strategy that can actually build relationships for you long term. Let people know how you're actively growing and what your hopes are, what problems you're excited to learn about and work on and solve in the future. Your interviewers may even have a couple of suggestions for you about how to move through those, and different things that you could do to grow in other ways. It also gives you an opportunity potentially to stay connected with them, because even though you have a gap now and they're not ready to hire you today, perhaps in 3 months things change again and they remember the conversation, they remember the engagement you had around closing that gap, and they call you back and consider you for something new. I've said it before, careers are long and the world is small. Your network is your most powerful career tool here. And as you're facing this current gap closure, if that's what you're working on, and onward. So in terms of a summary process around your story, again, we're claiming value for what you have. You do have this wonderful complement of superpowers. You want to be clear about who you're talking to and what they're specifically looking for. And then you're looking at and saying, are there any gaps between the two? Have I clearly articulated that I can do what they're looking for in their language? Test your assumptions, practice those examples, those stories, those ideas with people that might be in the business. They might give you some other language that you wouldn't have found on your own that can help you to even hone your messaging a little bit more. The messaging is then going to be kind of formalized into paper or verbal story, and then you revise in your practice. And you revise in your practice until you've answered the objections and you feel confident and articulate about how you do it. The process seems linear. You might go back around a couple of times. Again, you're going to talk to many different people and do this many different times. So hopefully this is giving you some idea about kind of what we're looking to do and how you might be really successful in this process. Again, it's going to take time. If I were doing this for a job description that I was really excited about, I'd go through this point by point and really look at that whole job description and say thematically, what's most important for success in this role? And have I, in my resume, thematically articulated why I'd be great at it? Oftentimes I might say to somebody, is there a story that demonstrates this? If this is one of the most important 3 things in the role, and they could say, oh, that's in the 3rd bullet point under the 4th role. The likelihood of me reading down that far is low. Again, we're going to want to think about how do we actually show people that we are not one-trick ponies and that we do bring these skills forward in proactive ways that that they're going to be excited by. They are not going to be excited by every single thing we've ever done. This is why if you look at the resume template I have for working professionals, at the top it says relevant experience, not all experience. We are picking and choosing, we are curating the stories that we'd like to present to them for consideration for this particular role. It's not to say that there's not 20,000 other things that we could do. We are showing this one for them. I also want to remind you that the future isn't necessarily going to look like what the past looked like. So it could be that some of the skills that you have and the ways that you have of looking at things could be even more exciting to a company, because we need to innovate into this future. And if you are showing that you have some creativity and that you are able to really kind of collaborate with others and be curious about and that you're aware of what are potential influencers to change in the future, that's a really strong skill set to have right now. So to be thoughtful, not just about what the job is asking for today, but asking them some really smart questions about how well they are positioned for the future, where you are showing that you're actively thinking about that already. I would think that for the right type of company, that would be really attractive. Human skills are still in demand. So we are moving into a more automated world. I want you to be able to demonstrate that you are able to learn and adapt. You are able to critically think about things using data. and that you are able to convey and share information that helps people to adopt new ways of thinking and to achieve new outcomes that may be different from the past, recognizing that change processes are challenging for many people and organizations to move through. Where you can show you have good judgment and smart emotional intelligence, and that you are an inclusive collaborative manager, those skills are in demand and even becoming more so in this evolving future of work that we're living in, particularly where we're working in hybrid workforces, where some people are online, some people are more present, some people are permanent, some people are contract. Your ability to kind of cross over these different types of groups and bring them together and achieve outcomes in ways that people feel attached to the outcomes and the results is really, really important. So spend a little bit of time on that. Some of those things may not be so clearly asked for in the job description, and they're very much needed. So to be able to share the job description elements and that you have these important, strong leadership skills is incredibly beneficial. So getting into your delivery now, we have some gaps identified, some specific concerns, risks that companies might see between what we've done and what they'd like us to do. We've thought about how we want to speak about those more from the perspective of our capability to do the thing that's important rather than their worry about the thing that we can't do. Again, we're focused on that we can achieve what they are looking for and showing them unique ways that we're doing that. And now we have to share that with them. This is perhaps the hardest. Again, we're thinking about what they're looking for, and we are double checking to make sure that those resume bullet points and the stories that you'd like to share are truly showcasing those important skills and capabilities. I want you to please anticipate the hard questions and practice those answers. We talked about this a little bit in the behavioral interviewing webinar a couple months ago. You do want to think about these ideas and answer them again succinctly, specifically, honestly, and don't fill up all the spaces. So say your piece and move on. Applicants who gave a reason for a gap, an employment gap, got 60% more interviews than those who did not. Among applicants, this is from a study done by a company called Resume Go. Among applicants who provided a reason for their work gap, those who said they received additional training or education ended up with the highest callback rate. So again, you may kind of articulate it succinctly, clearly, and do also please read the application materials very carefully, because some of them are so specific to say, if you have a gap, a current or recent gap of more than 3 months, please be prepared to discuss it. Some people let you know, and again, they're telling you what's on the test. So pay attention and go through the details and their requirements carefully so that you don't miss some of those hints. On paper, keep it simple again. I encourage you, especially working professionals who've been around for a little while, we don't need to use months on our resumes anymore. Again, address those recent gaps very directly and succinctly. And again, remember, we're trying to show them that you are ready to resume work and that you have the skills that you're going to need to move forward. So please don't try to worry about filling up or kind of putting fluffy bits in to make other things look bigger than they were. It's really about this future focus, what they're looking for you to do, and showing where you acquired those skills to be able to do those. The resume needs to stand alone. A note about cover letters. I would encourage those of you who've done some recruiting yourselves to think about, when was the last time you really thoroughly read a cover letter? It's funny because those people in job search often spend a lot of time telling stories and explaining things in cover letters. They don't always travel together, so the resume really does need to tell the story on its own. The cover letter may be appropriate to share context and get somebody excited very briefly to read the resume. Oh, this is going to be a good one. I want to have a look at this. Please don't spend time trying to tell big stories in there to convince people, because the likelihood of them thoroughly reading it is low. You want to actually save that story to for the interview, and think about what's the bullet point, what's the preview that's going to intrigue them enough for them to say, oh, this is the person I want to hear that story. I want to bring them in. So again, please don't spend a whole lot of time on cover letters where it does more than explain to them you understand what the role is, you understand what the core skills and outcomes are for the role, and that you'd like to discuss your ability to do those things for them through the interview process. Non-work time took time and had value. So whether you were taking a class, working in a startup, volunteering, pro bono, whatever it was, be ready to share about that. Why did you choose to do that? What did you learn? How will you bring that forward in your next role? It may be hard for you to figure all of this out yourself, because again, we don't tend to put a lot of value to the things that we find mundane or easy. Those may be those things that the company is looking for. And this is why we're stronger together, and your skills with their needs and other people's skills put together uniquely is going to get the company some great results. We want to showcase those things that are important to them and make it easy for them to say yes to you. On LinkedIn, there's some new title options. I would be wary of those. They're not necessarily, it quote fills a gap for some people where they're like, oh, I now have something I can share here. It doesn't necessarily highlight what you want to do and show yourself necessarily in the most professional way. So think about your headline, highlighting what you're looking for, and highlighting what your offer is to the world. I did do a webinar last year on clarifying your offer. That's really clarifying what you're offering out to the world in ways that people can hear about you. And you can also leverage your about in your cover photo to share about interests and accomplishments. So, you know, the idea of in transition, it doesn't really tell people anything. If you told people that you had time off and you'd always wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail, and your cover photo is part of the Appalachian Trail, and that you'd done however many hundreds of miles of that during your time off, that's kind of a cool thing to speak about, and it shows them that you did something productive with your time, even if it wasn't work related. I know people all the time talk about wanting to take vacation so that they can come back rejuvenated and ready to work. You just did. Again, we're reminding them, I took a break. I thought about life. I thought about what I really want to contribute in the world moving forward. Here's some of the things I did professionally to stay current, and I'm ready. That story about your time off has value. In person, you want to establish rapport. You want to show them that you're going to be conversational, you're focusing on the future, you're focusing on collaborating with them in the ways that you're wanting to, and I want you to be enthusiastic about it, because they're going to spend a lot of time with you, and you want to actually help them to see that they would enjoy that. It would be easy for a recruiter to explain away if somebody said, hey, why does this person have a gap? For them to say they took a year off to care for an elderly relative. It doesn't take anything away from your skills in a new role. And again, you would want to be really clear also that, kind of that issue has resolved, and that, you're not distracted and you're ready to focus on the work ahead. A few months ago in the behavioral interviewing webinar that we did, I shared a couple of gimme questions. Why this role? Why this company? Please make sure that you're ready to answer those also. And if you've done the research about them, you're in that space already, helping them to see that you understand what you're asking for, you've done your research, and that you understand what the role is moving forward. So the other piece here is, again, that connection. You can use humor where it's appropriate, and just be thoughtful about this idea of whether or not you'd want to spend 40 hours or more a week with you. So you want to make it an enthusiastic or impression, and part of that is setting yourself up with a good Zoom situation, good lighting if you're in person. So don't please forget about the other elements of job search when you do get to that place of interview. You want to be pleasant and memorable. Your LinkedIn network will help you. Again, even in closing the gaps. You have people that have done the things before. You have people that are in some of those roles today, maybe that you haven't met yet, but who attended Yale or SOM or your undergraduate institution. There may be somebody who you worked with or adjacent to in a prior employer, and that person is now in a role or in a company that you're interested in. You can actually reach out to any of those folks and connect with them, remind them how you're connected. And if you ask them a question that they can say yes to, they most likely will say yes to a little bit of time with you. It's not a big question. It might be, I've just seen a job that is interesting to me. And as I'm preparing my application materials, I'd love to spend a couple of minutes with you just to understand your experience at the company. So you're asking maybe for 10 or 15 minutes. You're not asking them for a referral yet, especially if it's not somebody you've met before. It would be hard for me to refer you into someplace if I haven't got, if I don't know how you're going to reflect on my brand. So again, you're asking small questions to help them to say yes. Easy for people to say a little bit about their own personal experience about something. You're going to hear how they speak about the company. You're going to be able to infuse that language into your materials, your presentation. And if they like you at the end, then you can ask the next question about, I'm excited by this. You know, would you have a look at my application before I submit it? And they might say yes to that. They might say, I'd be happy to submit it for you. But you need to actually kind of build the rapport and the relationship first. When people know who you are and what you're interested in and what you can do, this is another reason your network is so important. Sometimes you can go around those challenging ATS systems, and people will share why they want somebody to talk to you that is outside of, you know, what might be a traditional path forward. To those people who know you and like you already, your gaps, which might seem huge to you, are much smaller and easier for them, and they'll help you to cross over them as well. Again, show your network who you are through your LinkedIn, through your conversations with them, how you think, what you know, what you care about. And oftentimes opportunities that you wouldn't even look for will find you. Some research has shown that up to 60% of roles out there are never posted. So that is, you know, kind of the delivery piece of this presentation. As we are moving into the wrap up and Q&A, I see that there's a couple questions that have popped in. I also want to remind you, Kayla will be putting into the chat a survey, and we would be grateful for your feedback about the session today and about your experience generally. And I'm hopeful that you have a couple of new ideas about how to think about your own gaps, how to clearly identify them, and a framework to think about how to mitigate some of those gaps where there may be either real or perceived gaps. If you, again, do want to reach out for a personal coaching conversation to explore those ideas more thoroughly for yourself, please do so. So closing your gap, just a couple of wrap-up ideas. Your re-entry may take some time, and I expect will require some trial and error. Learn from the process. Claim value for every single conversation you have, every interview, even every rejection. Pay close attention to who said yes to what and who said no to what, because the same delivery to a different person who has different interests may work. So don't kind of throw out all of your thinking just because one person said no. Those of you who remember your statistics classes, remember that an N of 1 is not enough to draw conclusions that are worth much. I also want you to consider all of the people that you meet along the way. Careers are long, the world is small, and reaching back and letting people know where you are in the search. Reaching back, a hint somebody used a couple of years ago was at Thanksgiving, reaching out to say what they were grateful for in a person that had and people that had helped them through their search. All of a sudden generated a very busy December and January where they expected some slow months, simply because they reached out and expressed gratitude generally for the process and for people's time. So let people know where you are, what you're doing, so that they might actually share you into the next opportunity. Again, search elements work together. Closing a gap without actually knowing where to find jobs or practicing in-depth storytelling or really unpacking the job descriptions isn't terribly helpful. So again, if you're just getting started in this process, there's lots of other resources out there to support you. And I do want to say a big thank you to my colleague, Kayla Heaslip in Alumni Relations, because she is the backbone of this entire program. And without her support, none of it would happen. So thank you, Kayla, for all that you do for all of us in making this possible. I did mention this really briefly, and I just want to remind you, some of the tools that you do need to be successful are not those that people prioritize. I talked to them at a very high level in game-changing job search resources, internet bandwidth, lighting, staging, those all come to mind. And I think those are things that many people, not everyone, but many people have gotten better at through the pandemic. To the extent that we continue on in a hybrid workforce, we're going to want to continue to be focused on those types of things. And just really quickly showing you that I'm looking at the camera right now. If I change the orientation and I'm looking down, like a slight shift in, kind of how I'm sitting and presenting now feels like I'm not necessarily in a conversation across the table from you, but rather at an awkward angle, looking down or up. So, so be aware of those types of things. We are now to the Q&A part of our adventure. Let me see what I've got in here. Kayla, again, thank you for sharing in the chat the information about the survey and the past webinars. And as I peek over to the questions and answers, please feel free to share whatever specific questions you have. This is a good one. How do you craft a LinkedIn that works in general at the same time you are tailoring resumes for every potential job opportunity? That's a great question. So the way I look at that is this. I am currently working at the Yale School of Management. I am, though, more than my title, and I am more than my company. So I talked to somebody earlier today, and they were focused on a specific segment of the transportation industry. And their LinkedIn headline talked about that specific thing, problem, focus area that they were working on. Again, that person is more than that company, which was part of what was encompassing the cover photo, and their headline, while it didn't say their job title and their company name, it did, which is the default. Many people have that as their headline. It had a statement, but the statement was focused on the problem of that particular business. In fact, their interests around, kind of how that problem contributes to making the world at large better is more than just that particular problem. This just happens to be how they're focused on solving that problem today. So what I'd encourage you to do is to kind of take a step back from the specific of today. You can tailor that a little bit more, share a little bit more about that, either in the section of the profile that talks about that job, or just keep that part of it more general, where these are things that would come out in the interviews. I'd want your headline and kind of what I think about as the LinkedIn billboard at the top of the screen, your cover photo, your personal professional photo, your statements about yourself in the about area, and the and your headline statement to be more engaging, where each one of those attracts somebody's interest. It brings them in a little bit. You might notice if you've connected with me on LinkedIn, I use this background as the background for my professional photo, so that people can actually recognize SOM, those of you who have actually been in Evans Hall. So you can do these types of things that are attracting people's attention. I'm also going to look at it and say, hopefully you're not looking at, getting back to this idea of a LinkedIn profile, you're not looking at things that are so dramatically different that they wouldn't fit into that idea about what you care about and what you focus on. I used to have a headline that said, I help successful leaders who get out of their own way. Just because we're successful doesn't mean we don't occasionally benefit by having some additional help by an executive thinking partner or having our thinking challenged and built to have the impact in the world that they're meant to. That is true about the work I do here at SOM. It is true about the work I've done previously, and it will be true probably in years to come. There are different ways to articulate what you do in a bigger way. So hopefully this is giving you some idea. I also would look at it though and say, is there anything about my profile, if I looked at it, again, we're identifying those gaps, that would put somebody off. So from the perspective of the person that you're talking to. So here again is where I go back over to some of the companies that you're looking at and understanding what they value and making sure you're not showing anything that they would take issue with or have a problem with. So if you want to kind of work on your LinkedIn, there is a great course. If you go into the general career resources under the career resources and recorded webinars page of the alumni portal, there's a course in there that can give you some hints about how to craft your brand in LinkedIn and also how recruiters and other people are using it. There's also some phenomenal hints in there about research and networking too. So that's my biggest suggestion around LinkedIn is maybe to invest in that course, which is complimentary to Yale students and alumni with the code and really dig into that. And I'm happy to help in a coaching session if you want me to challenge and build your thinking there too. I am not seeing any other questions. If anybody else has a question here, please pop it in. Otherwise, we're just about done and on time, I believe, as well. I would love, though, for you just to remember, again, this growth mindset is incredibly important around closing gaps. Gaps are explored from the perspective of the people that you're trying to attract, not from your own perspective, and focusing on that capability and your ability to move forward successfully is really the focus here, not the gap itself. So that's what I've got for you today. Kayla, do you have anything else? Are you seeing anything else in the chat or the Q&A?
No, I think that's it. Thanks, Cindy.
Sure, awesome. And we're taking a break in August. We'll see you back in September. So thank you so much for participating in this career development webinar series. Have a great day.